Somewhere right now, there is somebody staring at a checkout screen, just watching a concert ticket that was listed at 80 bucks magically inflate to 140. We've all been there, right? We all know that exact moment of quiet rage. It's literally a universal experience for hundreds of millions of us. But how exactly did one single company get so massive that it could just dictate the terms of live entertainment for decades? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how this happened, step by step. We'll use the source material to guide us through the timeline, the tactics, and the ultimate legal reckoning. Okay, let's dive into this and trace the exact anatomy of that checkout process we all absolutely dread. You start at step 1, selecting what seems like a totally reasonable $80 ticket. But wait, then comes step 2, the facility charge. All right? By step 3, bam, you're hit with an order processing fee. And finally, at step 4, you're staring at a $140 final price tag. Plus, incredibly, a delivery fee for a PDF file that costs them literally nothing to send. I mean, it feels like an ambush, doesn't it? But as the research shows, this pricing structure isn't a glitch. It is absolutely not an accident.
What we were just looking at actually has an official name. It's called drip pricing. This is a highly deliberate psychological strategy where the final price is hidden from you until the very last payment screen. You see, studies on online checkout behavior show exactly why they do this. People are just far less likely to abandon a purchase when that final, bloated price is revealed only after they've spent all that time selecting seats, filling in their personal info, and emotionally committing to actually going to the event. Ticketmaster exploits this psychology at a massive scale. That fee structure hits you only after you've already decided, yes, I'm going to this concert. And because they control the primary marketplace for the vast majority of major venues, well, you can't exactly just close your browser and buy the tickets somewhere else.
Section 1. The origin story. From innovator to monopoly.
To really understand how we ended up with zero alternatives, we got to look back at the company's history. Because, ironically enough, Ticketmaster actually started out as the good guys. Back in 1976, they were founded in Phoenix, Arizona, by a group who saw a huge problem that desperately needed solving. Buying concert tickets in the 1970s was a genuinely painful experience. You had to physically travel to a box office, wait in this massive line, and essentially just cross your fingers and hope the show wasn't sold out by the time you actually got to the window. So early Ticketmaster offered genuine liberation. They introduced a computerized system to sell tickets remotely and instantly. They solved a real problem, and they built real trust with fans. And this brilliantly illustrates the contrast with the modern era. Today, as you know, the company is associated with structural control, trapped customers, and just universal frustration. It went from being a revolutionary innovator to becoming an inescapable toll booth. So how exactly did we get from 1976 to today? Well, this timeline maps out the 50-year chronological arc of the company. It all starts with that founding in '76. Then as we move into the 90s, we hit the first major speed bump when the band Pearl Jam testifies before Congress in 1994. Fast forward a bit to 2010, and the landscape shifts dramatically with the Live Nation merger. Now, this dominance goes largely unchecked until the massive system failure of the 2022 Eras Tour crash. And finally, we arrive at the historic 2026 Department of Justice verdict. So let's walk through these specific milestones together to see exactly how the trap was set.
Section 2. Gilding the Toll Booth, the 1990s and beyond.
We begin by looking at how Ticketmaster built up its massive market advantage throughout the 1990s. This was the era when they really started aggressively acquiring competitors, like Ticketron back in 1991, and locking down exclusive contracts with major venues all across the country. And as those exclusive venue contracts tightened, the pushback began. By the mid-90s, the rock band Pearl Jam decided they had absolutely seen enough of these rising fees. Eddie Vedder and his bandmates tried to book a national tour exclusively using venues that didn't use Ticketmaster, hoping to give their fans a cheaper alternative. Well, Ticketmaster pushed back incredibly hard. In 1994, Pearl Jam actually went to Washington. They testified before Congress, warning lawmakers that the company held a virtually absolute monopoly. The Justice Department even opened an investigation based on this testimony. But ultimately, absolutely nothing happened. Pearl Jam eventually just had to give up, with their manager publicly stating it was simply impossible for a major band to tour America without going through Ticketmaster. The sheer structural control had won.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing what that structural control actually looks like in hard numbers. By leveraging all those exclusive venue contracts and completing a massive merger that we'll talk about in just a second, Ticketmaster captured a staggering 86% of the concert market share. That leaves a measly 14% for literally all other competing platforms combined. I mean, that is just total dominance.
And honestly, even if you expand the view to look at the total event market, so factoring in major sporting events alongside music, their dominance remains completely overwhelming. They hold a massive 73% market share. When you control nearly 3/4 of all event ticketing in the entire country, you aren't just a service provider anymore. You are the infrastructure. You become a massive, non-competitive toll booth sitting right on the only road into town.
The absolute turning point that cemented this massive market share was the 2010 merger. That year, Ticketmaster merged with Live Nation, which was the world's largest concert promoter. And here's exactly how this vertical integration works. Live Nation signs the artists. Live Nation books the tours. Live Nation owns or controls hundreds of the venues. And Ticketmaster? They sell the tickets to all of it. One single, merged company came to sit at every single point of the live music transaction. If any competing ticketing company wanted to serve those venues, they faced immense pressure to back off. Competitors were essentially just squeezed out of the ecosystem entirely.
Section 3. The climax, the Taylor Swift tipping point.
But as history shows us, structural control on this scale eventually buckles under its own weight. And that brings us to the event that finally broke the system's back. In 2022, Taylor Swift announced the Eras Tour. The demand for these shows was just completely unprecedented, and it entirely buckled Ticketmaster's pre-sale system. Millions of verified fans were completely locked out. The website just kept crashing repeatedly, and in the ensuing chaos, ticket prices on resale platforms surged to thousands upon thousands of dollars. The frustration was no longer just that quiet rage at checkout, it became a massive, highly visible public disaster. This spectacular failure led to immediate bipartisan congressional hearings. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle demanded answers, ultimately resulting in the CEO actually being called in to testify.
So the crucial point is that this disaster opened the door for investigators to look really deeply into the company's internal culture. And what they found was highly controversial. During the subsequent 2026 trial, internal messages from a Live Nation employee were uncovered and presented as evidence. In these messages, the employee wrote to a colleague that prices were outrageous, called customers so stupid, and proudly boasted that the company was, quote, robbing them blind, baby.
Adding fuel to the fire, it was revealed during the legal proceedings that the employee who authored those specific messages was actually later promoted to a ticketing executive position within the company. Now, to be totally objective here, the company vigorously defended itself by stating that these messages were simply immature banter and absolutely not reflective of their corporate policy. However, critics and lawmakers viewed these internal communications very differently. They saw them as a stark confession of corporate hubris and evidence of a monopoly exploiting its captive audience.
Section 4. The reckoning, the fall, and the future.
All of this public scrutiny and the uncovering of these internal practices really set the stage for our final chapter, the historic legal resolution aimed at dismantling this dominance. The reckoning finally arrived in April of 2026. Following a massive lawsuit driven by the Department of Justice and supported by more than 30 state attorneys general, a federal jury reached a verdict. They found that Live Nation and Ticketmaster had indeed illegally maintained monopoly power in the ticketing market. It was a true landmark decision that validated decades of consumer complaints.
Following that historic verdict, a monumental DOJ settlement was reached. Now, this settlement includes some really strict mandates designed to restore genuine choice back into the market. First up, it explicitly caps ticketing service fees at 15%, which directly targets that drip pricing inflation that has infuriated buyers for years. Second, and this is perhaps more importantly for the overall structure of the industry, it forces Live Nation to allow competing ticketing platforms to offer tickets to its events. They can no longer act as the exclusive toll booth.
But, while this verdict is incredibly historic, it's also important to ground ourselves in reality here. The practical impact of lower prices and real everyday competition, that's going to take years to fully materialize. Appeals will play out in the courts, massive contracts will take time to expire and be renegotiated. I mean, think about it. It took 30 years for Pearl Jam's 1994 warnings to finally be proven right in a court of law. So while the legal framework has finally shifted, that immediate frustration you feel at the checkout screen might still linger a while longer as the whole industry slowly restructures itself.
A company that once genuinely solved a major problem for music fans became the ultimate symbol of what happens when a business stops competing and starts controlling. We've looked at the data, the history, and the intense legal battles that define this entire era of live music. But ultimately, this story hits closest to home when we look at our own wallets. So I want to leave you with this question to think about. What is the absolute most you have ever paid in Ticketmaster fees? And despite all the frustration, did you actually end up going to the show? It really highlights the emotional grip that live music has on us and why fair access to it matters so incredibly much. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.